All right, so I am going to read to you all this motion for reconsideration and order for written decision is what it's titled. All right, so this is what I filed last night that I forgot to sign, that I'll eventually sign, and it is what it is. So, the nature of the case. As we know, the nature of the controversy regards my right as a member of the public to record, and whether Local Rule 83.8 governs courtroom procedure and whether it extends beyond courtroom procedure into the lobby, corridors, hallways, and auditoriums, which ultimately supersedes the effects of CFR 102.74.420, rules governing conduct on federal property, as applied here thus too. The distinction between jurisdiction and property, and whether the federal government has complied with or ever accepted the offer of cession with the state of New Hampshire, which is the only way to cede, let me turn on airplane mode, state property according to New Hampshire RSA 123.1, acquisitions of lands by United States of America, or jurisdiction, and in what capacity, if any. The court found the defendant guilty of disobeying a lawful order to stop recording in the lobby of 55 Pleasant Street, Concord, New Hampshire, a public forum, on 4/9/24. This motion for reconsideration is based on critical legal errors and misinterpretation of facts, which are supported by the Supreme Court of New Hampshire, Town of Newington versus Campanella and Carty Construction Company, 103 New Hampshire 211, 1961, and Air Force Law Review by Major Douglas E. DeVore II, 72 AFL 161, which highlights various issues such as the distinction between ownership and jurisdiction and the federal acquisition of real property cession, as well as public real estate information. Lastly, this court has neglected to provide any written decision on the merits containing clearly articulated facts and findings of fact and rulings of law as required by Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure 32 and 35, as well as basic due process. The big question is whether Local Rule 83.8 governs courtroom procedure, or, as it says, whether it extends beyond the courtroom into the lobby and hallways, and if it supersedes the effect of 102.74.420, which explicitly regulates commercial photography, which is distinct from the public's right to record as a First Amendment protected activity. Who really has jurisdiction in the courtroom, because a witness in this case stole my phone in the middle of the trial and claimed that the judge confiscated it, when in actuality it was the court security officers and U.S. Marshals who had authority. Yet, as we know, there was nothing filed by the court as far as a contempt charge goes. The Marshals told me that Concord Police Department has jurisdiction over a theft that took place, even though CFR 102.74.380 tells us that all persons entering in or on federal property are prohibited from C, stealing property. That's you, Michael Plant. Whereas this court has a duty to assist Concord Police Department in resolving the theft of my phone in the middle of trial by a witness in the case. And at the very least, this conduct from key witness calls for a mistrial. Statement of grounds. 1. Local Rule 83.8 governs courtroom procedure, and CFR 102.74.420 governs conduct on federal property. 2. Conduct and procedure are separate concepts. 3. A local rule has no effect outside courtroom procedure. Otherwise, a judge would have the power to enact legislation, which we know from the separation of powers doctrine would be an absurdity. 4. This court should reconsider their finding of guilt in this case because the prosecution failed to establish jurisdiction, and that they failed to provide any documentation to prove their claims that 55 Pleasant Street is federal property. Neither have they produced any proof of exclusive ownership of the lands in question. Moreover, the court itself has yet to explicitly state what jurisdiction this case is under. In fact, Your Honor has merely stated that this is not a Seventh Amendment court. This leaves me in unknown territory as how to defend myself under what laws, rules, and procedures I'm supposed to follow. In Newington v. Campanella, 103-211, the Honorable Sullivan J. found that RSA Chapter 123.1 did not purport to cede jurisdiction. Until jurisdiction is formally accepted by the United States, the territorial jurisdiction of the state continues. 40 USCA Section 255. See Cook v. Wilson, 208 Arkansas, 459 and 187 Southwest 2D7. So, there was no evidence to warrant a finding that the United States has assumed exclusive jurisdiction of the lands in question. Further support of the need for proof, articulation, and evidence from the federal government is highlighted by Major E. Douglas E. DeFore II in his Air Force Law Review article defining property in Part 2, Property Defined. To understand the concept of federal property ownership and the legal arrangements that can be made regarding that property, it is important to understand several concepts. One concept is the notion of property itself. Another concept is the ownership of property. A third concept is jurisdiction. A final concept is the relationship between the rights associated with property ownership and the way those rights may be transferred to another. Emphasis added. Clearly, New Hampshire RSA 123.1 is not just mere words on paper, as so aptly put by Attorney Chen during the proceedings, and demands to be addressed by the federal government. 6. The fact that this point regarding jurisdiction was simply mocked and ridiculed by the government, and that was satisfactory to the magistrate here, requires careful reconsideration on the record. The burden is not on me to refute my own defense. Rather, this burden be squarely in the government's court. They have provided nothing to prove ownership nor jurisdiction. 7. What is property? The Constitution instructs us that, quote, the Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular state. Article 4, Section 3. The government has failed to show 8. The government has failed to show that a violation occurred on any property belonging to the United States over which it shall have the power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations. 9. Further, in Part 2A.1 of the Douglas article, the next important factor to understand is the development of ownership of the land itself. 10. There are two ways for the federal government to acquire property: purchase and cession. 11. There is no record of any land purchased by the federal government from or in the state of New Hampshire at the state archives. The proper way for the federal government to acquire New Hampshire property is via cession through New Hampshire RSA 123.1, where the offer from New Hampshire has never been accepted by the federal government, as proven by the archival search of New Hampshire records and proven to us by Exhibit E on the trial record. 13. Again, in Newington v. Campanella, the New Hampshire Supreme Court clearly assures us that the entire state is New Hampshire territory, at least until the federal government accepts our offer to cede jurisdiction under New Hampshire RSA 123.1. 14. The pertinent part of Major Douglas's article is at Part 2A3. The federal government can also acquire property through state cession. 15. Further, a cession is the act of relinquishing property rights. Authority for the states to cede jurisdiction to the federal government springs from the implied authority of the states to deal with the general government in any manner to accomplish the powers reserved to them by the Constitution. 16. Nowhere is there a mention of New Hampshire ever ceding any land to the federal government, and the federal government has not provided a single shred of proof to counter these facts. 17. Another concept we must consider here is in Part 2B, distinction between ownership and jurisdiction. Ownership is the actual control of the rights associated with a parcel. Jurisdiction is a government's general power to exercise authority over all persons and things within its territory. The federal government may own property while at the same time have no more authority over that property than any other landowner. Lastly, in Part 3.2, we see the well-known concept of jurisdiction as applied to federal real property is the power to pass and enforce United States laws on matters that are ordinarily reserved for the states. Jurisdiction can generally be divided into four main categories: exclusive, concurrent, partial, and proprietarial. 19. The federal government has not yet proven nor articulated exactly what jurisdiction and type is applicable in this case. New Hampshire RSA 123.1 clearly allows nothing more than concurrent jurisdiction, which the federal government has yet to accept. Therefore, we need not even delve into if it were concurrent jurisdiction. Why else, 20, why else would the U.S. Marshals tell me that Concord Police Department has jurisdiction over a theft at the location of 55 Pleasant Street? 21, clearly Major Douglas is echoing my entire argument here regarding New Hampshire RSA 123.1 and the question of the legal jurisdiction of the federal government in New Hampshire, of which there is none. 22, my constitutional rights are personal and may not be asserted vicariously. Quoted Broderick versus Oklahoma in 1973, United States Supreme Court case. The court cannot abrogate my personal right to create records and record my public interactions for my enjoyment and posterity. 23, video evidence attached here clearly shows multiple DHS officers claim that the judge confiscated my phone, and then it became Michael Plant who took it without authority and has refused to provide any receipt or official documentation, which further shows his behavior was unlawful, therefore criminal, felony level theft. This court must be compelled, 24, this is wrapping it up here. This court must be compelled to reconsider their prior decision in the face of these irrefutable points and grant the following relief. A, reverse and find the defendant not guilty due to these above stated legal errors, misinterpretations of facts, and newly discovered supporting case law. B, order a new trial under Rule 33 based on these grounds above, coupled with this new evidence regarding jurisdiction. C, as well as provide a written decision on the merits with the findings of facts and rulings of law in accordance with Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure 32 and 35. A written decision is necessary for appeals purposes. The verbal record is insufficient to articulate exactly what the court's rationale here was. D, order the immediate return of my phone and the arrest of DHS officer Michael Plant, as he stole my property without authority and has provided zero documentation of his theft. E, grant further relief as the court deems just and proper. Respectfully submitted, Frank Footloose Staples. And so, yeah, I forgot to sign this thing. But that's what I filed. I also submitted 8 videos of different phone calls, and right outside the courthouse and out in front of the Norris Cotton building twice. So that's that. I just wanted to get that out there so you guys could see what I'm working with. I wrote that all myself, and we'll see how it goes. Thank you.